When I was small, I believed that evil existed only in the pages of dusty fairy tales. The idea of curses, black magic, or twisted illusions seemed remote, like the stuff of folklore. But sometimes reality proves that these things, or at least something uncanny, can manifest right here in our everyday world. This is a story of how my family got entangled with Khmer black magic, how my stepmother fell ill under bizarre circumstances, and how our household endured a flurry of frightening events, strange apparitions, terrifying sickenings, and even a haunting butterfly that might have been an ancestral spirit returning with grave news. I do not claim to fully understand the supernatural. All I know is that I witnessed things I cannot easily explain away. There were tensions about money, like so many family disputes, and a vengeful relative, fueled by greed, who turned to sinister means. My mother, technically my stepmother, but I call her mom in daily life, was the victim of unholy spells that nearly drove her to the brink. Meanwhile, our protective spirits, our karmic blessings, or perhaps the watchful presence of an ancestor staved off the worst of the curses. And then, amidst the swirl of black magic and malevolent energies, came the tragedy of a drowned neighbor boy, returning home in eerie apparitions that left us trembling in wonder and sadness. If you wish to read on, brace yourself. These events are complex, tragic, and in moments unbelievably surreal. Nonetheless, they have shaped who I am and how I see the world. I come from a family situation that was complicated from the start. My father had 2 wives, my biological mother having passed, and my stepmother, whom I often refer to as Mom, to avoid confusion, entering the picture. The arrangement was never exactly normal, but in rural areas, extended families can be intricate. My father's side had numerous half-siblings, step-siblings, and so forth. Tensions inevitably arose when money became involved, especially inheritance or monthly stipends like pensions. Let's clarify, my father, well into his 60s, had fallen gravely ill. He suffered multiple strokes, 5 times in fact, and his health had declined sharply, leaving him partially paralyzed. Our extended family scrambled to care for him, though the environment proved toxic. My father had a small pension or retirement pay, a sum that, though modest, was enough to provoke jealousy from various relatives. Among them was a distant half-sister, or cousin, who was married to a Khmer man from a neighboring province. Through him, she'd allegedly learned the ways of Khmer sorcery and bua nai, bua meaning charms or talismans, nai signifying powerful black magic derived from plants or spirits. Rumors circulated that she'd used these dark arts before to settle feuds or punish those who slighted her. Now she aimed her wrath at none other than my stepmother, over a trifling money dispute concerning my father's pension checks. It all started innocently enough. My father's pension was legally under his name, but my stepmother was effectively authorized to withdraw it each month for his care and living expenses. One day, a certain part of the extended family, my father's older children from the first wife, including that cousin with Khmer connections, demanded that they control the funds. They reasoned, "We're blood children. The stepmother is merely an outsider. She has no claim to this money." A certain daughter-in-law, married into that older side of the family, confronted my stepmother with vile words. She spat expletives, cursed her heritage, and demanded that the money be handed over. All the while, my father, semi-conscious from his stroke, sat in silence, barely aware of the uproar. My stepmother, though outraged, decided to relent partially to keep the peace. She offered to pass along some portion of the pension, hoping the older siblings would stop harassing her. But this daughter-in-law, apparently unsatisfied, raged on. She flung deeper insults, claiming that the stepmother didn't belong in this household, or that my father's pension rightfully belonged to them. The hostility felt personal. During the pandemic, particularly around mid-2021 or so, times were tough. Quarantine and social distancing made visits limited. We had to shield father from infections. My stepmother and I brought him to our home, taking shifts around the clock to tend his medication, feed him, change his linens. While I found a measure of solemn pride in caring for him, my stepmother endured immense stress. She was older, had underlying heart problems, and working to nurse a stroke victim 24/7 was physically and emotionally exhausting. She fell behind on her own well-being. We live in a small rural neighborhood, with a modest home that includes a front yard and a side yard where my stepmother runs a hair salon. Right next door is a little path that leads down to the river, a wide, deep waterway lined by coconut trees. My father's bed was in the front room, near the main door, so the house layout was fairly compact. We own a dog, an affectionate, loyal mutt that I've had since puppyhood. Typically, He's calm and only barks at actual intruders. But during the pandemic lockdown, specifically around July 2021, we noticed something bizarre. Every night at about 9:30 p.m., our dog would stand in front of the hair salon, with its shutters down, and bark ferociously at the darkness, facing the coconut trees near the river. Sometimes it wasn't just barking. He'd let out a chilling, drawn-out howl, almost like a wolf. At first, I assumed he was spooked by nighttime fishers or random passers-by ignoring the pandemic curfew. So I'd go out with a flashlight, scanning the area. Yet I saw no one. No fisherman, no shadow, not a stray cat. Nothing. The dog would not settle down until I physically coaxed him back inside. Whenever I approached him, he'd almost guide me with his gaze toward that stand of coconut trees, as if to say, "Look, there is something there." But I saw only empty gloom. Night after night, this repeated. 9:30 p.m., dog barks and howls at the same spot. The hair on my arms prickled. I started to suspect something supernatural or unseen was in that grove, but we were too busy with Father's care to dwell on it deeply. I prayed it was just an animal. 2 weeks later, my stepmother began complaining of fatigue. I chalked it up to stress, days of near sleepless nights caring for Dad. She also had a heart condition, so I resolved to handle more of the chores. Yet her complaints intensified. She'd say she felt a burning heat in her body around dinner time. By 6 p.m., she'd be flushed and sweaty. She told me the sensation worsened around her eyes, which grew hot, like a fever. We measured her temperature, but it read normal or slightly elevated. Could it be blood pressure spikes? We rushed her to a clinic the moment local restrictions eased somewhat. The doctors did a thorough check, but found nothing abnormal. Blood work, ECG, all normal. They suggested maybe she was anxious or depressed. I knew in my gut something else was at play. As days passed, her symptoms got more alarming. Her eyes began to appear bloodshot in the late afternoon. Her skin tinted an odd yellowish hue, and her belly seemed to bloat. Around this time, our dog's nightly howling and barking also escalated, like he sensed something sinister around the property. One evening, I tried urging my stepmother to see a different doctor. She refused, complaining of shortness of breath at the mere mention of stepping outside to ride to the hospital. She even refused visiting the local temple or pagoda, and that was truly bizarre since my stepmother was devout, regularly praying, donating alms, and attending festivals. Now she insisted she couldn't cross the threshold of a temple yard. She said that as soon as she reached the temple gates, she felt suffocated, overheated, and unbelievably faint. I decided to consult a local fortune teller/spiritualist, a boi, as we call them, someone known for seeing hidden ills or curses. I practically had to drag my stepmother along. She was reluctant, weirdly so. Usually, she believed in such things, but this time her hesitation was extreme. Upon arriving at the fortune teller's cramped shop, which smelled of incense and had walls hung with mystical diagrams, we waited an hour among other worried-looking patrons. The boi gave my mother suspicious glances from across the room. Eventually, she told the others to wait and beckoned us forward, as if sensing urgent trouble. My stepmother sat down, trembling slightly. The fortune teller took her wrist, feeling her pulse, then closed her eyes. She frowned, muttering, "Troy! Oh my God." She asked if we had any known enemies. We explained the tension with the older side of the family, especially that daughter-in-law rumored to know Khmer sorcery. The fortune teller nodded, as if that validated her suspicion. She dealt out a deck of Vietnamese fortune-telling cards, in 9 piles. She studied them, occasionally muttering under her breath. Then she looked up, telling us my stepmother was indeed afflicted by bua nai from the Khmer tradition. That phrase alone set my hair on end. She wants to drive your mother insane, Buffet said, make her delirious, or possibly kill her. She also intended to harm you, but your birth sign, the tiger, deflects a portion of the curse. You remain mostly safe, but your mother is not. I glanced at my stepmother, whose face was chalk white. The fortune teller continued, I am not powerful enough to undo this. Your mother's condition is advanced. I can only offer short-term relief. She gave us 3 small bua, charms, written on thin paper, instructing us to boil these in water at home, letting my mother drink some and bathe with the rest. Then she recommended visiting a more specialized Thay or spiritual master, someone possibly from the Khmer tradition or an equally adept exorcist. She told my mother she was lucky, that her good karma from frequent temple visits had delayed the darkest effects so far. We left feeling overwhelmed. At home, we followed the instructions. My stepmother drank some of the boo-infused water and used the remainder to wash her face. She felt mild relief for about a week. But in that time, something else strange appeared. A large black butterfly began fluttering about our house. It would circle the yard, land near the hair salon's door, then flutter away. Sometimes we'd find it perched on the altar to our ancestors, or on the bedroom window's outside ledge. No matter how we shooed it off, it returned around midday, flying slowly, silently, like it carried a message. My stepmother, though spooked, recognized a common superstition. Black butterflies often represent the visit of an ancestral spirit. She suspected it might be her father, or some elder, returning to warn us. Indeed, she claimed that whenever she saw that butterfly, she felt a chill. Each night, the dog barked. Then, by morning, the butterfly came. My stepmother's health seesawed, some days better, some days worse, but overall declining. She lost weight, grew pale, and had trouble sleeping. Even so, she was determined to keep caring for my father. But the dog's nightly alarm was a constant reminder that something intangible lurked. Perhaps an ghostly soldier or spirit had been dispatched by whoever cursed us. Maybe it roamed among the coconut trees at 9:30 p.m., surveying the property, waiting for a chance to strike. A cousin of mine recommended a Khmer temple about an hour's drive away. The monks there supposedly specialized in reversing black magic. She said, "Take your mother there. She'll get help." I convinced my stepmother that it might be her best chance. She hesitated, fear of stepping on temple grounds, but ultimately agreed. We drove early one morning. The temple was unassuming but had distinctive Khmer architecture, tall spires, intricate carvings of apsaras, and a serene courtyard. As soon as we entered the courtyard, my mother's eyes reddened. She clutched my arm, complaining of searing heat. She nearly fainted. I had to half carry her inside. There was a robed monk, presumably the abbot, who approached us. He observed her from a distance, whispered to another monk, then asked us to wait. My mother sat trembling on a bench, sweat pouring down her brow. After half an hour, they invited us into a smaller chamber. The abbot, let's call him Venerable Thatch, took my mother's pulse and examined her eyes. He asked us a series of questions about her symptoms, family disputes, and if she had any enemy. We told him everything. He nodded gravely, saying, "This is a strong Buanai, very malicious. She only stands here by blessings and strong karmic merit." He told us there was a specialized ritual needed, which might require multiple sessions. Then, he gave my mother a cup of saffron-colored liquid to sip. She coughed, reeling at the bitterness, but drank it anyway. Meanwhile, Venerable Thatch sprinkled her with water that had been blessed. My mother let out a strangled moan, then felt a wave of relief. The abbot looked relieved as well. Yes, the curse is responding. We can reduce its hold on her. Finally, he told us that for complete removal, we'd have to consult a certain layman, a Khmer Thay skilled in the old ways, living in a village. He wrote an address and told me, "Go see him. Tell him I sent you. He'll know what to do." We thanked him profusely. By the time we left, my mother was able to stand and walk more easily, though still shaky. The abbot insisted we come back soon for follow-up if we couldn't find the layman. Following the abbot's directions, we drove another 15 minutes through back roads to a small settlement near the river. There we found a house that looked humble, but had many talismans nailed to the walls, wooden carvings, metal charms, hammered nails forming symbols. A wiry man in his 60s emerged, greeted us politely, and said in Khmer-inflected Vietnamese, "You must be the family from the temple." He introduced himself as Ba Vi, Chu Ba for short. I explained the situation. He nodded. "Sit down. Let me see." He stared at my mother for several moments, then asked her to do various postures, placing her hands just so, aligning her ankles, etc. Then he tapped her shoulders with a small wooden dagger, muttering incantations. My mother started sweating heavily. I saw tears streaming down her face. Chuba then told me he sensed an infestation on her shoulders. He said it was as though something heavy perched on her, draining her life force. He needed to cut it away. What followed was the strangest ritual I'd witnessed. He had my mother sit on a low wooden stool and told me to stand back. He took out a short, curved blade, looked ceremonial, with Khmer script. He lightly tapped the air above her shoulders, head, and down her spine, as if slicing invisible cords. He chanted in Khmer, intermittently spitting a fine mist of some herbal infusion around her. He collected some of my mother's hair, snipping a few strands, placed it in a small coconut shell, then lit an incense under it. "This is so the dark entity sees it can't cling to you anymore," he explained. My mother groaned and coughed. Finally, Chuba told her to stand, gave her a small hammered coin charm, and said, "Wear this around your neck. Do not remove it." He explained that the person behind this curse was quite vindictive, but had only partial success because they lacked absolute mastery. Still, my stepmother had a legitimate threat to her life if we didn't break the curse soon. He said we'd need to come back weekly for a while. As for me, he said my whole birth sign, Year of the Tiger, made me spiritually tough, so the curse tried to infect me but failed. Nonetheless, I should remain cautious. Don't get too emotional or fearful, or it can slip a small harm upon you, he warned. We left with a sense of hope. Back home, my mother followed his instructions to brew certain leaves and bathe in them, plus recite mantras nightly. She found mild improvement over the next days, her eyes less bloodshot, her belly less swollen. Around the same time my mother's health improved, the dog's nightly barking subsided. The 9:30 p.m. routine of frenzied howling ended. He'd occasionally stand at the salon's entrance, ears pricked, but then he'd lie down quietly. We no longer heard those chilling howls echoing in the night. Also, that large black butterfly vanished. We didn't see it again. It was as if some spiritual chaos had ended, at least temporarily. We followed up with the temple abbot once to express gratitude, though we kept a low profile. My stepmother's sense of dread near temples had also lifted. On the second visit to see the abbot, she walked in without that suffocating reaction. Word spread among extended family about my stepmother's affliction. Whispers circulated that it was so and so from the older side. The daughter-in-law who demanded the pension was the prime suspect. We had no direct proof, but she had both motive and rumored connections to Khmer black magic. Another older sibling apparently confided that she overheard the daughter-in-law boasting about making that woman pay. However, ironically, after my stepmother's exorcism, the daughter-in-law fell into misfortune. Her crops failed, her side business tanked, and her husband lost a major job opportunity. Rumor had it they were forced to borrow money. People said it was karmic blowback. What you send out eventually returns. My stepmother never gloated. She's too kind for that. But she quietly believed it was cosmic justice. The fortune teller had said, when they harm others, they must pay the price. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. She was correct. Amid these Bua Nai tribulations, another tragedy struck our small community. A neighbor's teenage son, whom we'll call Den, drowned at the nearby beach while partying with friends. Though not blood-related to me, he lived just across from us. I'd grown up knowing him. He was once bright, but in middle school fell into petty theft. By the time he was about 17, he'd done jail time. Out of jail and trying to turn over a new leaf, he joined buddies for a day at the beach. They went for a swim. Somehow, Den got caught in a rip current or wave and vanished beneath the water. His father, frantic, led a search with local fishermen for hours, with no luck. Eventually, they consulted a local Fap, another spiritual type, who told them to place the boy's clothes on the shore and burn incense to call his spirit. In a half hour, the waves carried his body ashore. People whispered that the father's prayers had the same effect as my mother's bua had for her, some spiritual bridging. 3 nights after his funeral, rumors spread that his ghost wandered around the neighborhood. His mother claimed to see him rummaging through their old tool shed. Another neighbor said she spotted him crouched in her backyard at night. Some said it was a collective grief-induced delusion. Others insisted they heard him calling faintly in the wind. At this time, his maternal grandfather, whom we called Ong Eno out of respect, apparently woke at 2 a.m. one night and saw what looked like Den's silhouette at the front porch, puffing a cigarette. The old man shouted, "Den, is that you?" The figure turned, then disappeared. Everyone ran out with flashlights, found no one. That same night, his cousin swore he heard footfalls in the hallway, a faint cough, but no one was visible. Den's older sister dreamt that he was stuck outside the house, unable to enter because protective charms at the door barred him. She woke in tears, convinced he was restless. The family then invited the local monk to do a special ceremony, letting his spirit come inside for a final farewell. After that, the sightings dwindled. But one final story, A cousin of his said that on the 21st day after his passing, he dreamt of Den saying, "Brother, I drowned because something pulled me. I was tricked into jumping where the sea floor fell away. Now I'm cold. Please burn me another set of clothes." The cousin woke, dismissing it as a dream. Then the next night, he used earphones to listen to music, yet claimed to hear a faint voice calling, "I'm cold, help me." Panicked, he sprang up, checked the window, saw nothing but swore he glimpsed a shadow resembling Den outside. The family performed another altar burning of paper clothes, etc. The next morning, no more illusions. Between my mother's brush with Khmer black magic and this ghostly saga around Den's drowning, the entire village found itself steeped in supernatural gossip. Some folks blamed the same malevolent daughter-in-law for conjuring a watery spirit that caused Den's misfortune. Others said no, that was mere coincidence. My mother didn't publicly comment, but at home she told me, when curses are loose, sometimes innocents get hurt too. Maybe the spirits were riled up. But I never heard of direct evidence linking the daughter-in-law to Den's drowning. He had his own troubled path, and the ocean can be cruel. Still, the overlap in timelines gave the community shivers. The dog, for instance, stopped barking nightly around the time of my mother's partial exorcism, but it was also just days before Den drowned, and some gossips claimed the bin that haunted our yard drifted onward to cause more tragedies. Within a month or two, my mother's health improved drastically. She resumed short visits to the temple. Her color returned. Her eyes no longer went bloodshot each evening, and that sense of burning across her body receded. On the next trip to the temple, Venerable Thatch told her she had repaid some karmic debts and that the darkest clouds parted. Meanwhile, we never again saw that black butterfly or felt the unseen presence outside at 9:30 p.m. The daughter-in-law, rumor says, soon found herself dealing with ongoing financial struggles. Whether that's cosmic retribution or not, I cannot say. My father, still bedbound, was left mostly alone by the older side of the family. They realized they couldn't siphon off his pension with so many eyes watching. Perhaps that ended the feud. Or maybe they recognized we were under powerful spiritual protection now. Our dog still stands guard each night, but rarely barks except if someone truly approaches. My stepmother lived on for many more years, grateful for every dawn. She quietly prays for the misguided relative who might have cursed her. The fortune teller, the abbot, and Chuba the exorcist each said that if we responded to evil with vengeance, it'd only fuel more cycles of retribution. My mother took that wisdom to heart. For me, I remain a bit haunted. I glimpsed how fragile life can be, one incantation away from tragedy, or one ripple in the sea away from drowning. The illusions, the dog's panic, the black butterfly, my mother's inexplicable sickness, the dreadful drowning of young Den. Each piece taught me that we humans exist in a delicate balance, sometimes brushed by forces we can't fully comprehend. I share this story not to sensationalize, but to preserve its cautionary lessons. Family disputes over money can spark unbelievably cruel actions. Curses, sabotage, buanai is real to those who wield it. Spiritual protection can manifest in animals, like a butterfly believed to be an ancestor, or loyal dogs noticing invisible presences. Those who attempt to harm others via black magic often suffer karmic backlash. Evil sown might flourish temporarily, but the final harvest is despair. Even the innocent, like that neighbor boy, can fall victim to stray misfortune when malevolent energies run rampant. Had I not witnessed my stepmother's transformation, from a lively, chatty caretaker to a feverish, hollow-eyed, red-faced invalid in mere weeks, I might not have believed black magic could do such damage. But seeing the exorcism rituals, the nightly dog howls, and the eventual break in the curse after repeated spiritual guidance convinced me otherwise. Time has passed, and my stepmother eventually recovered enough to walk around the yard, greet customers at her little hair salon, and chat with neighbors again. She keeps certain protective charms in her room, gifts from the abbot and from Chuba. She's careful about letting bitterness take root, because she fears that negative emotions might open a door to new curses. The bickering about my father's pension mostly died down. My father, continuing in a fragile state, never fully grasped what transpired. Perhaps it's better he didn't. He might have felt guilty. Or maybe, on some level, he always knew the older children had vendettas. In any event, he remains quiet, leaving my stepmother to handle daily life. As for the daughter-in-law rumored to have triggered it all, her life is not going well. Each time we hear an update from extended family, it's more hardship, lost job, unsettled marriage, never enough money. Possibly, that's the karmic cycle. Or maybe just life. I do not gloat. I only hope she eventually abandons any dark arts she might be dabbling in. Because no matter what, black magic's price is steep. When I stroll near the coconut trees at dusk, I remember the nights of hearing my dog's frantic howls. The orchard seems serene now, an ordinary place of rustling palms. Yet sometimes I pause, half expecting a distant bark at 9:30 p.m. Or I see a random butterfly flutter by, usually a smaller, harmlessly colored one, and recall how that large black butterfly perched on our altar, as though delivering some cryptic message from the beyond. And I think about poor Den, the neighbor boy lost to the sea. I think about how easily life can slip through our fingers, like a wave receding from shore. My mother always says, cherish your days. Avoid fueling hate. Because curses and tragedies can come from the smallest seeds of resentment. So here we are, a household that overcame a monstrous curse, a mother who nearly succumbed to Khmer black magic, and a neighborhood that still whispers about the drowned boy's ghost. Life goes on, as it must. My mother remains cautious, never forgetting how close she came to destruction. I remain vigilant, making sure no sinister forces find another foothold. We burn incense regularly, keep certain protective charms by the door, and keep relationships civil yet guarded with those kin who once cast us in ill will. Because if we learned anything from this story, it's that darkness creeps in when we least expect it, and the best we can do is stand firm, cling to the good, and trust that any curse, no matter how potent, can be broken with the right combination of faith, compassion, and the help of those who still believe in helping each other.